This is Surfing Through Cinema. I'm your host, Hawaii Harry. Today I'll be discussing the next film for Classic Hollywood Week. Starring Cary Grant and Deborah Kerr, this episode is all about An Affair to Remember from 1957. Okay, so this is the first time I'm doing this new format. I'm just going to get into the plot details and then my personal details after our break. So we'll start off with the plot. So Nick Ferrani, he meets Terry McKay, and Nick is played by Cary Grant and Terry by Deborah Kerr. And they meet on a cruise ship that's going from Europe to New York City, where they're both from. And they stop and meet his grandmother in France, and while they're there, they realize that they love each other versus their significant others. And so the rest of the trip, they're getting to know each other, just spending more time together. And they come up with this plan and say, 6 months from now, which would be July, Nick said he's going to be a painter, and Terry said she'd be broken off with her fiance, and Nick as well. They both had fiancés, and that they would meet each other at the Empire State Building to confess their love and then eventually get married. And so the cruise ship ports back in New York City, and 6 months later, Terry, she's broken up with her very abusive fiance, and on her way to the Empire State Building, she gets into an accident. A car hits her, and Nick, he's up in the Empire State Building waiting for her up until midnight, and then he just gives up and says, oh, she doesn't love me, and she's rejected me. And so now 6 more months have passed, so it's been a year since the events of this movie have started. And Nick, he's back with his fiancée, and Terry, she's not back with hers, but they're still kind of friends. And she works as a music teacher. She's in a wheelchair. She can't walk really anymore. And Nick, he's become a painter. He sells his own art at a gallery. He becomes very, very successful with it. And Terry, she wants to hide the truth from Nick because she's afraid he'll reject her because she can't walk anymore. And so on Christmas Eve, Nick, he finds out where Terry lives because his grandmother, she offered this shawl for Terry if she had passed on. And Grandma, she did pass away and gave it to Nick. And he goes in to give her this gift. And he sees that she's on the couch, and he kind of passive-aggressively tells her that, hey, you stood me up, where were you? And she has a hard time revealing to him the real reason why she wasn't there, because she loves him and doesn't want him to reject her. And then he said, I made these paintings, and one of them I did of you, and my curator said that I sold to a woman in a wheelchair. And then he looks up at her bedroom door and he's like, I wonder. And she's like, wait, come back. And he runs into the bedroom, and he looks in the mirror, and he sees that her painting, or his painting he did of her, is hanging in her bedroom. And then he almost breaks down, starts to tear up a little bit. And he goes back and he says, why didn't you tell me? I love you. I want to be with you. And realizing this, she said, you know what? If you could become a painter, then I can learn to walk. And that's where the film ends. They finally end up together after all that all those chaotic things that happened to them. All right, so that's the plot to An Affair to Remember. I'm going to go on a break real quick, but first, here's a message from our sponsor.
This podcast is brought to you by Anchor. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Here's how. It's totally free. There are tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast from your computer and even your cell phone. But that's not all. Anchor distributes your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many, many more. You could even make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. Anchor is everything you need to make a complete podcast all in one small place. So go on and download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started today.
Okay, so now that we're back from our break, I'm going to get into my personal views on An Affair to Remember. So, to be honest, I liked the movie after they get back to New York City. When they're on the boat, it's a fine love story and all, but uh, I just have a hard time getting in with the premise. These two people already have fiancés and significant others, and yet they're falling in love with each other and kissing each other and all of that. You know, sure as it turns out, their fiancés are terrible people, but at the same time, cheating is terrible too. So like, it's kind of hard to get in with that premise. But other than that, once they get to New York and they actually follow through with breaking up with their fiancés, then the movie starts to pick up, and I start to like it a lot more. Then the romance starts to pick up a little bit. That being said, though, I love Cary Grant. I think he really is one of the greatest actors of all time. He's very likable as this character, very charismatic. And then Deborah Kerr's character of Terry, she takes no nonsense from him. They kind of have a really nice banter that I think fits really well with this movie. See, any other points? I love the music. I thought this song for An Affair to Remember is very, very nice, very touching. And I'll admit, at the very last scene of the movie, when it started playing again, and when he looks in the mirror, well, the way they have the shot set up is he opens the door, we see his reaction, and we see what he's seeing in the mirror. We never actually see a different angle of the actual painting. We just see it in the mirror, and he just like almost falls apart, and he's like relieved. I thought that was a beautiful moment, and I think the best scene in the whole movie. And there's even a similar shot where Terry, she just had this horrible experience with her fiance, and she opens up her window, and you see a reflection of the Empire State Building. And similar shot. She's hopeful and has wishful thinking that she'll end up at that point. And all in all, though, I thought it was a great romantic movie. Again, I thought Cary Grant and Deborah Kerr's characters, they had really good chemistry. They had a great romantic connection. I just wish that they didn't already have fiancés. It makes it really awkward and hard to like, because why am I supposed to root for them? Because they're cheating on their fiancés. Now, they were terrible people. I will admit that. The boyfriend, I can't remember his name, he's very abusive, he gaslights Terry a lot. I don't like him at all. I think he's a villain. He's pretty much the villain of the movie. And then Cary Grant's fiancée is just kind of funny. She's like this very rich socialite type of lady who really could go on with life without him, but she just likes messing with him. There's a scene with her calling him, and it's pretty hilarious. And the reactions on his face, he's like, no. And he just hangs up. But he ends up back with her for a little bit anyways. It's pretty funny. All in all, it's a great movie. I just wish they didn't have that element of them already having fiancés. I think that makes it kind of hard to root for their love. I mean, sure, it's true love. They really do love each other, and they realize how shallow their other relationships are. But I still think they should have done the courteous thing and not cheat on their significant others until they broke up. Well, not cheat, but I think they should have given them the decency of breaking up with them and then getting together. But it's a movie, it's a little unrealistic, the romance, but nevertheless, it's considered the greatest romance movie of all time, and I can see why. Beforehand, it was made in another movie in the 1930s. It was based off of a book or a play, I think. And then in the 90s, of course, we had Sleepless in Seattle, which is loosely based off of this movie. But the main character in that, Meg Ryan's character, she decides to use elements from this movie, An Affair to Remember, such as meeting in the Empire State Building and whatnot. And there are very similar shots in that as well. So, it's a very popular movie. In fact, I even have a copy of it right here. Just bought it at the thrift store. And a Fair to Remember. I mean, I just love Cary Grant. If you look at the back of it here, there's like this funny scene where they're trying to hide the fact that they're interested in each other, but everyone sees them. Everyone knows what's going on the ship, I should say. But I'd say I give this movie a 7 out of 10. It was a great movie. I still don't like the relationships that they already had. Alright, well those are my thoughts and feelings on An Affair to Remember. Next time I'll be discussing the next and first film for James Bond week, starring Sean Connery in his very first go as James Bond, and also the first James Bond movie ever, really. This episode is all about Dr. No. Alright, well until next time, this has been Surfing Through Cinema with Hawaii Harry. Take care.
Thank you for listening to Surfing Through Cinema. Make sure to check us out on Facebook at Surfing Through Cinema with Hawaii Harry and on Instagram with Surfing Through Cinema. We also have a website, www.anchor.fm/Surfing Through Cinema, where you can learn more details on upcoming episodes and on past episodes.